The fluorescent lights above bed 7 buzzed like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across Jake Morrison's weathered face. His dark eyes stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the same water stains he had memorized over the past 3 weeks. The Walter Reed Medical Center's trauma ward hummed with activity around him, but Jake remained an island of stubborn silence in the sea of healing. Dr. Patricia Hendricks approached his bed for the 4th time that morning, her clipboard held like a shield against his expected rejection. She had tried everything: reason, medical authority, even bringing in fellow veterans to talk sense into him. Nothing worked. The decorated Navy SEAL refused every treatment, every surgery, every intervention that could save his mangled left leg. "Good morning, Jake," she said softly, knowing she would get no response. His jaw remained set in that familiar line of determination that had probably served him well in combat, but was now his worst enemy. "The infection is spreading. We need to operate today, or we'll have no choice but to amputate." Jake's fingers tightened around the thin hospital blanket, the only sign that he had heard her words. 3 weeks ago, an IED in Afghanistan had shattered his leg, torn through muscle and bone like it was paper. The same explosion had killed his team leader, Marcus Chun, and left Jake with survivor's guilt that cut deeper than any physical wound. Dr. Hendricks sighed and made another note on his chart. She had seen this before: warriors who came home broken, not just in body but in spirit. Jake Morrison was one of the finest soldiers she had ever treated, according to his file. Multiple commendations, 3 tours of duty, and a reputation for never leaving a man behind. But now he seemed determined to leave himself behind. "I'll be back this afternoon," she said, though they both knew it was pointless. "Please reconsider. Your team wouldn't want this for you." As she walked away, Jake's eyes flashed with something dark and painful. She was wrong about what his team would want. They were all dead now, except for him, the sole survivor of Alpha Team 7. The man who had failed to spot the hidden explosive that ended everything. The morning shift change brought a bustle of activity to the ward. Nurses hurried between beds, checking vitals, administering medications, and offering the kind of gentle care that Jake consistently refused. He had grown accustomed to their routines, their faces, their futile attempts at conversation. Most had given up trying to connect with him after the first week. But something was different today. A new voice cut through the familiar sounds. Younger, more uncertain than the veteran nurses who usually worked this ward. Jake didn't turn his head, but he listened as the voice asked questions about patient care protocols and medication schedules. Fresh out of nursing school, probably. Another idealistic young person who thought she could save the world, one patient at a time. Around noon, lunch trays clattered onto bedside tables throughout the ward. Jake heard footsteps approaching his bed and prepared for the usual ritual. A tray placed on his table, a cheerful invitation to eat that he would ignore, and the inevitable removal of untouched food an hour later. "Hi there," the new voice said. "I'm Sarah Williams. I'll be your nurse for the afternoon shift." Jake kept his eyes on the ceiling, but something in her tone was different. Not the practiced cheerfulness of someone trying too hard, but a natural warmth that seemed genuine. Still, he had no intention of responding. He had perfected the art of being present, but completely unavailable. Sarah placed his lunch tray on the bedside table and pulled up a chair. This was unusual. Most nurses delivered the food and moved on to the next patient. Jake could sense her studying him, but not in the clinical way the doctors did. There was something else in her attention, a quality he couldn't quite identify. "You know," she said conversationally, settling into the chair like she had all day, "I had a brother who served overseas. Different branch, but same dedication. Same stubborn streak, too." Jake's breathing remained steady, but internally he tensed. Another well-meaning attempt to connect through shared military experience. He had heard variations of this approach from several staff members already. "My nephew was in the Army. My cousin served 2 tours. My grandfather fought in Vietnam. All trying to build a bridge he had no intention of crossing." But Sarah didn't continue with the expected story about her brother's service or his difficult homecoming. Instead, She sat quietly for several minutes, and Jake began to relax. Maybe she was just taking a break, using his bed as a resting spot during her busy shift. The thing about my brother, she finally continued, is that he never talked about what happened over there. Not to me, not to our parents, not to anyone. He came home different, but he kept it all locked up inside. Jake felt a familiar tightness in his chest. The same feeling he got whenever anyone tried to psychoanalyze his situation or offer amateur therapy about processing trauma. He prepared to retreat further into his mental fortress, but Sarah's next words caught him completely off guard. He used to say something, though. When things got really bad, when he thought no one was listening, I'd hear him whisper these words: adapt and overcome, never leave a brother behind. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. His eyes snapped away from the ceiling, focusing on this young nurse with sudden, sharp attention. Those weren't generic military phrases that anyone could look up online. That was the unofficial motto of Alpha Team 7. The words Marcus Chun had drilled into them during training, the promise they had made to each other in the mountains of Afghanistan. Sarah seemed to notice his reaction, but didn't push. She simply sat there, her brown eyes holding his gaze with steady compassion. For the first time in 3 weeks, Jake Morrison spoke. "Where did you hear that?" His voice was rough from disuse, barely above a whisper. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her expression gentle but serious. "From someone who cared about you enough to make sure I knew how to reach you when words weren't working anymore." Jake's mind raced. Who could have told her those words? His team was dead. He had watched them die, had carried what remained of them to the extraction point. The rescue team hadn't known their unit's specific motto. The medical staff who had treated him in Germany wouldn't have known. The doctors here certainly didn't know. "I don't understand," he said, his voice stronger now, but filled with confusion and something that might have been hope. Sarah smiled, and for the first time since he had arrived at Walter Reed, Jake felt something crack in the wall he had built around himself. "Your teammate, Marcus Chun. He's been calling the hospital every day since you arrived, trying to find a way to get through to you." The room seemed to spin around Jake. "That's impossible. Marcus is dead. They're all dead. I was there when the IED went off in Kandahar province 3 weeks and 2 days ago," Sarah said gently. "I know what you saw, Jake, but Marcus survived. He's been in a medical facility in Germany, recovering from his own injuries. The explosion threw him clear, but he was knocked unconscious. When he woke up 3 days later, the first thing he asked about was his team. About you." Jake stared at her, his entire world shifting on its axis. For 3 weeks, he had carried the crushing weight of being the sole survivor, the one who had failed to protect his brothers. The guilt had been eating him alive, making him feel unworthy of the medical care that could save his leg and his life. "But the others," he whispered. "Rodriguez, Thompson, Williams." "Williams was my brother," Sarah said quietly. "Tommy Williams. And yes, he died in that explosion, along with Rodriguez and Thompson. But Marcus lived, and so did you. And my brother made all of you promise something before that last mission, didn't he?" Jake nodded slowly, remembering. Tommy Williams, their communication specialist, had been the youngest member of their team, just 22 years old, with a sister back home who was studying to become a nurse. He had made them all swear that if anything happened to him, they would take care of each other, that they wouldn't let survivors' guilt destroy what he died protecting. "He made us promise to live," Jake said, the words feeling foreign after weeks of choosing death. "That's right," Sarah said. "And right now, you're breaking that promise. Marcus has been trying everything to reach you, to let you know he's alive, to convince you to accept treatment. When the hospital staff told him about your condition, about your refusal to cooperate, he asked me to come here. He knew I was Tommy's sister, knew I was a nurse. He thought maybe I'd listen to family," Jake finished. Sarah nodded. "Marcus is being transferred here tomorrow. He's been fighting his own battles. Burns over 30% of his body, 3 broken ribs, a concussion that left him confused for the first week. But every day, as soon as he could form coherent sentences, he asked about you. About Jake Morrison, the man who carried him to safety even though he thought Marcus was dead. Jake closed his eyes, feeling tears for the first time since the explosion. The weight of 3 weeks of guilt began to lift, replaced by something he hadn't felt in so long he had forgotten its name. Hope. I carried 400 yards through enemy territory under sporadic gunfire, with your own leg mangled and bleeding. The medics said it should have been impossible. They said anyone else would have passed out from blood loss and shock. But you got him to the extraction point. Jake opened his eyes and looked at this remarkable young woman who had somehow managed to do what weeks of medical intervention could not. She had given him a reason to live. I don't remember carrying anyone. I just remember the explosion and then waking up here. Trauma affects memory, Sarah explained. But the rescue team documented everything. You saved Marcus's life, Jake, just like he's trying to save yours now. The afternoon sun slanted through the hospital windows, casting everything in a golden light that seemed appropriate for this moment of revelation. Jake looked at his untouched lunch tray, then at Sarah, who was watching him with patient understanding. What happens now, he asked. Now you let Dr. Hendricks operate on your leg. You accept the treatment that can save it, and maybe with time and physical therapy, you can walk again. Really walk, not just survive. Jake nodded slowly, feeling like he was emerging from a long, dark tunnel into daylight. Will you stay? During the surgery, I mean. When I wake up, will you be here? Sarah smiled, and Jake saw something of her brother in her expression. The same courage, the same determination to protect the people he cared about. Wild horses couldn't drag me away. Besides, Marcus specifically asked me to make sure you don't chicken out before he gets here tomorrow. For the first time in 3 weeks, Jake Morrison laughed. It was a rusty sound, barely recognizable, but it was genuine. Tell Dr. Hendricks I'm ready. Tell her. He paused, looking at this young nurse who had somehow managed to resurrect him with nothing but the truth and her brother's memory. Tell her that Jake Morrison doesn't break promises to his team. As Sarah stood to go find the doctor, Jake called her name. Sarah? Thank you. For Tommy, for Marcus, for reminding me who I used to be. She squeezed his hand briefly, and Jake felt the warmth of human connection for the first time since the explosion. You never stopped being that person, Jake. You just forgot for a while. But Tommy always said you SEALs were good at finding your way back from impossible places. As she walked away to arrange his surgery, Jake stared at the ceiling tiles one more time. But now, instead of counting water stains, he was counting the hours until he would see Marcus again, until he could begin the long journey back to being the man his team had died believing he was. The fluorescent lights still buzzed overhead, but their harsh glare seemed softer now, more like the light at the end of a very long tunnel. The pre-surgery medication made everything feel like it was happening underwater, but Jake Morrison fought to stay alert. He needed to be present for this moment, this turning point that Sarah Williams had made possible. As the orderlies wheeled his bed through the sterile corridors of Walter Reed, he caught glimpses of her brown hair at the edge of his vision, keeping pace with his gurney just as she had promised. Dr. Hendricks appeared at his side, her earlier frustration replaced by professional focus and what might have been relief. I have to ask one more time, Jake. You're absolutely certain about this? The surgery will be extensive, and recovery will be painful. Jake's voice was clearer than it had been in weeks, cutting through the medication's haze with surprising strength. I'm certain, document. I've got promises to keep. The operating room doors swung open, and Jake was wheeled into the bright, sterile environment where his future would be decided. As the anesthesia mask descended over his face, the last thing he saw was Sarah's encouraging smile through the observation window. Her lips moved silently, and he realized she was saying the words that had brought him back from the edge: adapt and overcome, never leave a brother behind. Consciousness returned slowly, like surfacing from deep water. Jake became aware of beeping machines, the soft susurrus of ventilation systems, and a dull ache in his left leg that somehow felt different from the sharp agony he had endured for 3 weeks. This pain felt purposeful, like the good hurt that came from a hard workout rather than the destructive fire of infection and decay. "Welcome back to the land of the living," a familiar voice said softly. Jake opened his eyes to find Sarah sitting in the same chair she had occupied yesterday, but now she was wearing civilian clothes instead of scrubs. Soft jeans and a blue sweater that matched her eyes, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that made her look younger than her 25 years. "What time is it?" Jake asked, his throat dry from the surgery. "About 6 in the evening. You've been out for 8 hours. Dr. Hendricks says the operation went better than expected. They were able to save significantly more bone and muscle tissue than they initially thought possible." Sarah reached for a cup of water with a straw. Small sips. The cool water felt like a blessing against his parched throat. As Jake drank, he became more aware of his surroundings. His left leg was elevated and heavily bandaged, but it was still there, still attached, still part of him. "How bad is it going to be?" he asked. "The recovery, I mean." Sarah set the water cup aside and leaned back in her chair. "Honestly, it's going to be harder than anything you've ever done, including SEAL training. Dr. Hendricks estimates at least 6 months of intensive physical therapy before you'll be walking without assistance. Maybe longer." Jake nodded, having expected nothing less. "But I'll walk again. If you put in the work, yes. You'll walk again. You might even run again, though probably not quite like before." Sarah paused, studying his face. "Are you ready for that kind of fight?" Before Jake could answer, there was a commotion in the hallway outside his room. Voices, the squeak of wheelchair wheels, and something that sounded like an argument between a patient and medical staff. Sarah stood up, looking toward the door with anticipation. "That would be your stubborn teammate arriving ahead of schedule," she said with a grin. The door burst open, and a wheelchair rolled in, pushed by a harried-looking orderly who appeared to be losing a battle of wills. The man in the wheelchair was barely recognizable as the Marcus Chun that Jake remembered, but there was no mistaking the determined set of his jaw or the intelligence in his dark eyes. Marcus was wrapped in bandages from his chest to his left arm, his head partially shaved where surgery had been performed. Healing burns covered the visible portions of his face and neck, giving his skin a mottled, pink appearance that spoke of recent trauma. But he was alive, undeniably and wonderfully alive. "I told you people I was checking out today," Marcus was saying to the orderly. "My friend just had surgery, and I'm going to be here when he wakes up, whether you like it or not." "Sir, you're not scheduled to be discharged until tomorrow morning," the orderly protested. "And visiting hours ended an hour ago." Marcus looked up and saw Jake staring at him from the hospital bed, and everything else in the room ceased to matter. 3 weeks of uncertainty, guilt, and grief crystallized into a single moment of pure relief. "Jesus, Morrison," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "You look like hell." Jake laughed, and it felt like the first real laugh he had produced in years. "You want to talk, Chun? What happened to your pretty face?" "Same thing that happened to your dancing leg," Marcus replied, maneuvering his wheelchair closer to the bed despite the orderly's continued protests. "We had a disagreement with some improvised explosives." Sarah stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on the orderly's arm. "It's okay, David. I'll take responsibility for Mr. Chin being here. Family privilege." The orderly looked confused. "But the patient registry shows that Mr. Chun and Mr. Morrison are team members," Sarah said firmly. "In the military, that makes them family. I'm sure we can bend the rules just this once." David shrugged and left, muttering about regulations and irregular procedures. Sarah followed him to the door, then turned back to the 2 men. "I'll give you some privacy," she said. "But, Marcus, if you push yourself too hard, I'm personally going to wheel you back to your room and handcuff you to the bed." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said with mock seriousness, though Jake could see the genuine affection in his expression as he looked at Sarah. "Thank you for everything." After Sarah left, closing the door behind her, the 2 men sat in silence for several minutes. There was too much to say, too much that had happened, too much guilt and relief and survivor's shame swirling between them. Finally, Marcus spoke. I remember carrying Rodriguez to the extraction point. At least, I think I remember. Everything's kind of fuzzy after the explosion. Jake shook his head. Rodriguez didn't make it. Marcus. Neither did Thompson or Williams. Sarah told me yesterday when she convinced me to have the surgery. Marcus closed his eyes, and Jake could see him processing the loss of their teammates all over again. I keep hoping I'll wake up, and it will all have been a nightmare. That we'll all be back at base, getting ready for another mission. I know, Jake said quietly. I've been living with that hope for 3 weeks. It's been eating me alive. Is that why you were refusing treatment? The reports I got were pretty sketchy, but Sarah told me you were basically trying to die. Jake looked at his hands, remembering the dark place his mind had been just 24 hours ago. I thought I was the only survivor. I thought I had failed all of you, gotten you all killed because I didn't spot the IED in time. It seemed like I didn't deserve to be the one who lived. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then he reached out and grabbed Jake's hand with his uninjured arm. His grip was weak, but determined. Listen to me, brother. That explosion wasn't your fault. The device was buried deep, camouflaged perfectly. Our intelligence said the area was clear. Hell, we had bomb dogs sweep that road just 2 hours before we went through. Nobody could have seen it coming. But if I had been more careful, if I had insisted on a different route, then we probably would have hit a different IED or walked into an ambush or stepped on a landmine, Marcus said firmly. Jake, you didn't fail us. You saved me. According to the after-action report, you carried me 400 yards while taking fire, with your own leg half blown off. Do you remember any of that? Jake shook his head. Not really. Everything after the explosion is just fragments. Pain, smoke, the taste of blood in my mouth. Marcus nodded understanding. Trauma does that. But I need you to know something. Right before I lost consciousness, I saw you. You were leaning over me, checking for a pulse, and I heard you say something. What did I say? You said, "Not today, Chun. Not on my watch." Then you picked me up and started walking. Marcus's voice grew thick with emotion. You didn't leave me behind, Jake. You brought me home. Jake felt tears building in his eyes. The first tears he had allowed himself since the explosion. I don't feel like a hero, Marcus. I feel like I failed. That's because you're a good soldier, Marcus replied. Good soldiers always think they could have done more, could have saved one more person, could have prevented one more tragedy. But the truth is, you did exactly what you were trained to do. You adapted to an impossible situation, and you didn't leave a brother behind. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of survivors' guilt beginning to shift into something more manageable. Not gone, perhaps never gone completely, but no longer crushing. So what happens now? Jake asked eventually. Marcus gestured to his bandaged body and then to Jake's elevated leg. Now we heal. We do the physical therapy. We learn to live with what happened, and we figure out what comes next. Any ideas about that last part? Marcus grinned, and despite the burns and bandages, he looked more like the team leader Jake remembered. Actually, I've been thinking about that a lot during my recovery. You know what I realized? We spent our whole careers learning how to save people in impossible situations. Maybe it's time we taught other people how to do the same thing. What do you mean? Training, Marcus said. Tactical medicine, survival skills, trauma response. There are a lot of first responders out there who could benefit from what we know. Police, firefighters, EMTs, even civilian medical personnel like Sarah. Jay considered this, feeling something stir in his chest that might have been excitement. You're talking about starting a training company? I'm talking about taking everything we've learned, the good and the bad, and using it to save other people's lives. To make sure that when someone's brother or sister or teammate is in trouble, they know how to bring them home. Jake looked at his friend, seeing the familiar fire in Marcus's eyes that had made him such an effective leader in the field. You've really thought this through, haven't you? I've had 3 weeks in a hospital bed with nothing to do but think, Marcus said. And you know what I kept coming back to? Tommy Williams made us promise to take care of each other. But I think he meant something bigger than just the team. I think he meant we should take care of everyone we can. The kid always was smarter than the rest of us, Jake said softly. Yeah, he was. And his sister isn't exactly lacking in the intelligence department either. Marcus glanced toward the door where Sarah had disappeared. That girl figured out how to reach you when trained psychologists and decorated officers couldn't. She's got instincts. Jake followed Marcus's gaze, thinking about the young nurse who had somehow managed to save his life with nothing more than the truth and her brother's memory. She's special, that's for sure. You know, she's been here every day since she started working at Walter Reed. Marcus said casually, even on her days off. The other nurses say she's been researching everything about traumatic brain injury and PTSD, try to understand what we've been through. Why would she do that? Marcus shrugged, trying to look innocent and failing completely. Maybe she cares about her patients. Maybe she wants to be the best nurse she can be. Or maybe, he paused dramatically, maybe she cares about one patient in particular. Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. Marcus, I'm just saying, brother, when a woman goes that far out of her way to save someone, it usually means something more than professional obligation. Before Jake could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. Sarah peered in, looking apologetic. I hate to interrupt, but the night shift is starting, and Marcus really does need to get back to his room for his evening medications. Marcus sighed, but didn't argue. The lady has spoken. But Jake, think about what I said. About the training company, about the future, about everything. As Marcus was wheeled toward the door, he called back over his shoulder. And Morrison, thank Sarah properly for saving your stubborn life. Some things are more important than military protocol. The door closed behind them, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts and the steady beeping of his monitors. For the first time in weeks, he found himself thinking about the future instead of dwelling on the past. A training company with Marcus sounded like exactly the kind of purpose he needed, exactly the kind of way to honor the memory of their fallen teammates. But more immediately, he found himself thinking about Sarah Williams, about her courage in approaching a hostile patient with nothing but compassion and determination, about the way she had held his hand during their conversation, the warmth in her eyes when she looked at him, the gentle strength that reminded him so much of her brother. Tomorrow, when she came back for her shift, he was going to ask her about something beyond medical care. He was going to ask her about coffee, about conversations that didn't involve hospital beds, about the possibility of getting to know the woman behind the nurse's uniform. After all, Marcus was right about one thing. Some things were more important than military protocol. And Jake Morrison was finally ready to start living again. 3 months later, the physical therapy room at Walter Reed had become Jake Morrison's second home. The large space buzzed with determined activity. Wounded warriors pushing their bodies to remember movements that had once been automatic, learning to walk again, to reach again, to live again without the parts of themselves they had lost in service to their country. Jake gritted his teeth as he navigated the parallel bars, sweat beading on his forehead despite the room's careful climate control. His left leg trembled with the effort of bearing weight, the reconstructed muscles and tendons protesting every step. But he kept moving, driven by a combination of stubborn pride and the knowledge that Marcus was watching from his own rehabilitation station across the room. "Come on, Morrison," called out Pete Kowalski, his physical therapist, a former Army medic who had lost his right arm to an IED in Iraq 5 years earlier. "I've seen grandmothers with more fight than that. Where's that SEAL determination I keep hearing about?" Jake paused, breathing heavily, and shot Pete a look that would have intimidated lesser men. "Keep talking, Kowalski. See what happens when I get off these bars." Pete laughed, unimpressed by the threat. "Promises, promises. First you have to make it to the end without falling over." The good-natured ribbing was part of the culture here, Jake had learned. Veterans helping veterans heal, using humor and friendly competition to push each other past the mental barriers that often proved more challenging than the physical ones. It was a brotherhood forged in shared understanding of what it meant to rebuild yourself from the ground up. Jake reached the end of the parallel bars and carefully maneuvered himself into his wheelchair, his leg aching but functional. 3 months of intensive therapy had brought significant progress. The doctors were cautiously optimistic that he would eventually be able to walk without assistance, though he would likely always have some degree of limitation. Not bad for an old man. Marcus called from across the room, where he was working with resistance bands to rebuild strength in his burned arm. The burns had healed well, leaving Marcus with a patchwork of scars that told the story of his survival. But his range of motion was still limited. Old man. Jake wheeled over to his friend, eyebrows raised. I'm 6 months younger than you, Sean. Yeah, but I age better, Marcus replied with a grin. Must be the superior genetics. Their banter was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah Williams, who entered the therapy room carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone with official business to conduct. She had been promoted to senior rehabilitation nurse 2 months ago, a recognition of her exceptional ability to connect with difficult patients and motivate them through their recovery. Good afternoon, gentlemen, she said formally, though Jake could see the warmth in her eyes when she looked at him. I need to discuss your discharge planning with both of you. Jake felt his stomach tighten. Discharge planning meant leaving Walter Reed, leaving the safe cocoon of medical care and structured rehabilitation. It meant facing the real world again, making decisions about the future that seemed impossibly daunting. Already, Marcus asked, echoing Jake's concerns. I thought we had at least another month here. Sarah pulled up a chair and consulted her clipboard. Your progress has been exceptional. Both of you are ahead of your projected recovery timelines. Dr. Hendricks believes you're ready to transition to outpatient therapy and begin the next phase of your rehabilitation. Which is what exactly? Jake asked, trying to keep his voice steady. That depends on what you want to do with your lives, Sarah replied. The military is offering both of you medical retirement with full benefits. You could go anywhere, do anything. The world is quite literally your oyster. Jake and Marcus exchanged glances. They had talked extensively about Marcus's idea for a training company, refining the concept during long hours of physical therapy and evening conversations. The idea had grown from a vague notion into a detailed business plan that excited them both. Actually, Marcus said, we've been working on something. A business proposal. Sarah raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Tell me more. Marcus leaned forward, his excitement evident despite his attempt to appear professional. We want to start a tactical training company. Specialized instruction for first responders, police, firefighters, EMTs, even medical personnel. Teaching them combat medical techniques, crisis response, how to operate effectively in dangerous situations. It will be based on everything we learned in the SEALs, Jake added, warming to the subject. But adapted for civilian applications. How to save lives when everything goes wrong. How to make critical decisions under pressure. How to bring people home safely. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. It sounds like meaningful work. Have you thought about where you'd base this company? That's the thing, Marcus said. We've been researching locations, and we keep coming back to the same conclusion. We want to stay in the D.C. area, close to Walter Reed, close to the Pentagon, close to the people who understand what we've been through. Jake watched Sarah carefully as Marcus spoke, trying to gauge her reaction. Over the past 3 months, their relationship had evolved from nurse and patient to something deeper and more complex. They had coffee together in the hospital cafeteria several times a week, long conversations that ranged from his recovery to her nursing experiences to their shared grief over Tommy Williams. There's an attraction there, undeniable and growing stronger, but Jake had been hesitant to pursue it while he was still a patient. The power dynamic felt wrong, the emotional vulnerability too intense. But with discharge looming, those barriers were beginning to crumble. There's something else, Jake said, making a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I'd like to ask you to dinner. A real dinner, not hospital cafeteria food. Somewhere with actual tablecloths and menus that don't list nutritional information. Sarah's cheeks flushed pink, but her smile was radiant. I thought you'd never ask. I was beginning to think you were going to hide behind patient-nurse protocols forever. Marcus cleared his throat dramatically. As touching as this moment is, I believe we were discussing discharge planning. Sarah laughed and consulted her clipboard again. Right. Official business. You'll both be discharged next Friday. You'll need to arrange housing, transportation, and outpatient therapy providers. I can give you a list of recommended facilities and providers in the area. About the housing, Jake said hesitantly. Do you know of any good apartments near here? I've been out of the civilian world for so long, I don't even know where to start looking. Sarah's expression became thoughtful. Actually, I might have an idea about that. My lease is up next month, and I've been looking for a place with better accessibility features. There's a new apartment complex about 10 minutes from here that's specifically designed for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. Wheelchair accessible, close to medical facilities, with a supportive community. That sounds perfect, Marcus said. What do you think, Jake? Jake found himself staring at Sarah, struck by a sudden realization. You're looking for a new place too? I am, she confirmed. Why? The words tumbled out before Jake could think better of them. Would you would you be interested in maybe looking at places together? Not necessarily together, but nearby? I know it's presumptuous, and we're just starting to explore whatever this is between us, but Sarah reached out and took his hand, quieting his nervous rambling. Jake Morrison, are you asking me to be your neighbor? Among other things, he admitted. Marcus stood up, gathering his resistance bands with obvious amusement. This is where I make a strategic retreat, and let you two work out the details of your domestic arrangements. But, Jake, remember what we talked about earlier. Life's too short to waste time dancing around what you really want. After Marcus left, Sarah moved her chair closer to Jake's wheelchair. So, dinner and apartment hunting. This is moving pretty fast. Too fast? Jake asked, suddenly, uncertain. Sarah shook her head. No, not too fast. Just different. 3 months ago, you wouldn't even speak to me. Now you're asking me to essentially move in next door and start dating. When you put it like that, it does sound a little crazy, Jake admitted. Crazy's not necessarily bad, Sarah replied. I've learned a lot about myself these past few months, watching you and Marcus recover. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that I'm good at helping people heal from trauma, and that I care about you in ways that have nothing to do with being your nurse. Jake felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. What kind of ways? Sarah was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. I think about you when I'm not at work. I worry about your progress, celebrate your victories, feel frustrated by your setbacks. When you smile, really smile, it makes my whole day better. And when you asked me to dinner just now, my first thought wasn't about hospital policy or professional boundaries. It was finally, you're ready to start living again instead of just surviving, Sarah explained. And I'd like to be part of that life if you'll have me. Jake lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I like that too, more than I can adequately express. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching other patients work through their rehabilitation routines. The therapy room buzzed with determination and hope, wounded warriors refusing to be defined by their injuries. Can I ask you something? Jake said eventually. Anything. That first day, when you told me about Marcus being alive, you said he'd been calling every day trying to reach me. But how did you know what to say? How did you know about our team motto? Sarah smiled, expression touched with sadness and pride. Tommy talked about you guys constantly in his letters home. He was so proud to be part of Alpha Team 7, so impressed by the men he served with. He wrote about Marcus's leadership, about your loyalty, about how safe he felt knowing he had brothers like you watching his back. He was a good kid, Jake said softly. He was. And he believed in what you all stood for. When Marcus called and explained the situation, when he told me about your refusal to accept treatment, I knew I had to help. Not just because you're Tommy's teammate, but because he would have wanted me to. Jake nodded, understanding more than he had before about the complex web of connections that had brought Sarah into his life. Do you ever wonder what Tommy would think about this? About us? Sarah laughed, and the sound was filled with genuine joy. I don't have to wonder. I have his last letter home. He wrote it the day before the mission, and it arrived 3 days after the notification of his death. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photos until she found what she was looking for. He said, "Sarah, if anything happens to me, take care of my team, especially Morrison and Chun. They're good men who give everything for others and never ask for anything in return. They're going to need someone to remind them how to be happy again." Jake stared at the phone screen, reading his fallen teammate's words with growing amazement. It's like he knew. Tommy always was intuitive about people, Sarah said, and he loved both of you like brothers. I think he'd be thrilled to know that taking care of his team led me to find something special with one of them. As they prepared to leave the therapy room, Jake felt a sense of completeness he hadn't experienced since before the explosion. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities and challenges. There would be difficult days, setbacks in his physical recovery, the ongoing process of learning to live with traumatic memories. But for the first time in months, Jake Morrison was genuinely excited about what came next. A business with his best friend, built on helping others. A relationship with a woman who saw past his scars to the man he was becoming. A chance to honor the memory of his fallen teammates by living the kind of life they would have wanted for him. As they walked through the hospital corridors, Jake reached out and took Sarah's hand. She squeezed back, and he realized that this simple gesture, holding hands with someone he cared about, represented everything he had fought to regain. Connection, hope, and the courage to believe in tomorrow. Next Friday couldn't come soon enough. 6 months after leaving Walter Reed, Jake Morrison stood in the parking lot of an abandoned warehouse in Alexandria, Virginia, watching contractors install the sign that would change everything. Tactical Response Training Solutions, founded by veterans for heroes. The morning sun glinted off the metal letters, and Jake felt a surge of pride mixed with nervous anticipation. The warehouse had been a risk, a significant financial investment that had required every penny of their military disability payments and the small business loan they had managed to secure. But Marcus had been right about the location, close enough to D.C. to attract federal and local law enforcement agencies, accessible to fire departments throughout the region, and spacious enough to accommodate the kind of realistic training scenarios they had planned. "Looking good, partner," Marcus said, approaching from the building entrance. His gait was steadier now, though he still favored his left side slightly. The burns on his arms and face had faded to silver scars that he wore like badges of honor. "The contractors say they'll have the simulation rooms ready by next week." Jake nodded, still staring at the sign. 4 months of intensive planning, permit applications, equipment purchases, and curriculum development had led to this moment. Their first class was scheduled to begin in 2 weeks. A group of DC paramedics who had requested specialized training in tactical emergency medicine. "You nervous?" Marcus asked, studying his friend's expression. Terrified, Jake admitted. "What if we're not ready? What if we can't teach this stuff effectively? What if we honor our teammates' memory by doing exactly what we set out to do?" Marcus interrupted gently. "Jake, we've trained everyone from green recruits to seasoned operators. We know how to teach life-saving skills under pressure. This isn't different. It's just a new mission." Jake smiled, appreciating Marcus's ability to cut through his anxiety with military directness. "When did you become the voice of reason in this partnership?" "Someone has to be," Marcus replied with a grin. "You've been distracted lately. Something to do with a certain nurse who's been spending a lot of time at your apartment?" Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Sarah's been helping with the medical training protocols. She understands emergency medicine from a different perspective than we do." "Uh-huh," Marcus said skeptically. "And the fact that she's beautiful, brilliant, and completely devoted to you has nothing to do with it?" Before Jake could respond, a familiar voice called out from across the parking lot. "Are you two going to stand around gossiping all day, or are you going to show me this famous training facility?" Sarah Williams approached them, carrying a large box and wearing jeans, sneakers, and a t-shirt that read Tactical Nurse, saving lives, taking names. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she looked ready for work. "What's in the box?" Jake asked, kissing her cheek in greeting. Medical supplies for your trauma training scenarios, Sarah replied. I talked to some of my colleagues at Walter Reed, and they donated expired supplies that are perfect for practice. Bandages, splints, training IVs, even some outdated medications you can use for demonstration purposes. Marcus looked impressed. That's incredibly generous. How much do we owe them? Nothing, Sarah said. They're happy to support what you're doing here. Word is getting around the medical community about your training program. There's a lot of interest from hospitals that want their emergency room staff to be better prepared for mass casualty events. Jake felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Interest is good, but what if we can't deliver what we're promising? We're asking people to trust us with their professional development. Sarah set down her box and took Jake's hands in hers. Listen to me. 3 months ago, you taught a group of firefighters how to perform emergency battlefield medicine in a simulated building collapse. Last month, you showed police officers how to treat gunshot wounds while maintaining tactical awareness. Every single person who has trained with you has said the same thing. You gave them skills that could save lives. She's right, Marcus added. We've got testimonials from 4 different agencies already. The Baltimore Fire Department wants to send their entire hazmat team. The Virginia State Police are asking about specialized training for their tactical units. Face it, Jake, we're actually good at this. Jake looked around the parking lot, taking in the transformed warehouse, the sign bearing their company name, the boxes of donated supplies. 6 months ago, he had been a broken man refusing medical treatment and contemplating death. Now, he was building something meaningful with his best friend and the woman he loved. Okay, he said, squaring his shoulders. Let's go look at those simulation rooms. We got 2 weeks to make sure everything is perfect. The interior of the warehouse had been transformed into a state-of-the-art training facility. The main floor was divided into several scenarios: a mock apartment building for urban emergency response, a simulated vehicle accident scene, complete with damaged cars, and a medical bay equipped with training mannequins and realistic wound simulation technology. This is incredible, Sarah breathed, walking through the vehicle accident scenario. It looks so real. That's the idea, Marcus explained. We want people to experience the stress, the chaos, the sensory overload of a real emergency situation. When they encounter the real thing in the field, it won't be their first time. Jake moved through the scenarios with growing confidence. This was what they were meant to do: take the hard-earned lessons of military service and use them to save civilian lives. Every piece of equipment, every training protocol, every simulated emergency was designed with one goal in mind: bringing people home safely. There's something else we need to discuss, Sarah said as they gathered in the small office area they had set up. I've been thinking about your staffing needs. We're planning to hire a couple of part-time instructors as we grow, Marcus replied. Why? Sarah took a deep breath, and Jake could see she was nervous about whatever she was going to say. I want to leave Walter Reed and come work here full-time. Jake stared at her in shock. Sarah, you love nursing. You're incredible at it. Why would you want to give that up? I'm not giving it up, she said firmly. I'm expanding it. Think about what you're doing here. You're teaching people to save lives in dangerous situations. But all of your medical training is focused on trauma medicine. What about medical emergencies that aren't trauma-related? Heart attacks, strokes, diabetic emergencies, allergic reactions? Marcus leaned forward, intrigued. You want to add medical emergency response to our curriculum? I want to create a comprehensive emergency response training program, Sarah said, her excitement building. Military trauma medicine combined with civilian emergency medical care. Imagine if every police officer, every firefighter, every security guard in the region knew not just how to treat gunshot wounds, but also how to recognize and respond to cardiac arrest, how to manage someone having a seizure, how to use an EpiPen correctly. Jake felt his mind racing as he considered the implications. That would make us unique. There are plenty of places that teach tactical medicine and plenty that teach basic CPR and first aid. But nobody's combining them into a comprehensive program. Exactly, Sarah said. And I have connections throughout the medical community. Doctors, nurses, paramedics who would be willing to help develop curriculum and serve as guest instructors. We could become the premier emergency response training facility on the East Coast. Marcus was nodding slowly, his strategic mind already working through the possibilities. It would require a significant expansion. More space, more equipment, more staff. More risk, Jake added, though he could hear the excitement in his own voice. More opportunity to save lives, Sarah countered. Isn't that what this is all about? Jake looked at his best friend and the woman he loved, both of them staring at him with hope and determination. 3 months ago, he had been afraid to take the risk of walking without assistance. Now they were asking him to bet their entire future on an even bigger dream. What about your career at Walter Reed? He asked Sarah. You're on track to become head of rehabilitation nursing. You'd be giving up security, advancement, everything you've worked for. Sarah smiled, and Jake saw something in her expression that reminded him of her brother Tommy. The same fearless commitment to doing what was right regardless of personal cost. Jake Morrison, 6 months ago, you taught me something important. You showed me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is risk everything on something you believe in. I believe in what we're building here. I believe in you and Marcus. And I believe that together we can create something that will save hundreds of lives. Jake felt a tightness in his chest that he recognized as the same feeling he had experienced on his first SEAL mission. A mixture of fear and excitement that meant he was about to do something that would change his life forever. All right, he said, extending his hand to Sarah. Welcome to Tactical Response Training Solutions. When do you want to start? Sarah shook his hand formally, then threw her arms around him in a hug that lifted him off the ground despite his still healing leg. How about right now? We have 2 weeks to develop a medical emergency curriculum, and I have a lot of ideas. As they broke apart, Marcus cleared his throat. Since we're making major life decisions today, there's something else I want to discuss. Jake, I think it's time you asked Sarah to marry you. Jake nearly choked on his own breath. Marcus, what? Marcus said innocently. You're clearly crazy about each other, you're planning to build a business together, and life's too short to waste time on unnecessarily long engagements. Plus, I'm tired of pretending I don't know you've been carrying that ring around for 3 weeks. Sarah's eyes went wide. Ring. Jake shot his friend a murderous look, then sighed and reached into his pocket. I was going to wait for the right moment, plan something romantic. Jake Morrison, Sarah said softly, if you think I need romance more than I need honesty, you don't know me very well. Jake pulled out a simple solitaire engagement ring, nothing fancy, but clearly chosen with care. Sarah Williams, will you marry me? Will you build this crazy dream with me? Will you help me honor the memory of your brother and our teammates by saving as many lives as we possibly can? Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. Yes to all of it. Yes to everything. As Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, Marcus applauded. Finally, now, can we please get back to work? We have a training facility to finish and lives to save. Jake looked around their warehouse, at the training scenarios they had built, at the sign bearing their company name, at the woman who had just agreed to be his wife. 6 months ago, he had been a broken man with no future. Now he was an entrepreneur, a teacher, a fiancé, and a man with a mission. Tommy Williams had been right. They didn't know how to bring people home safely. They had brought each other home from the darkest places imaginable, and now they were going to spend their lives teaching others to do the same. It was, Jake reflected, exactly the kind of legacy his fallen teammates would have wanted. 2 years later, Jake Morrison stood at the podium in the main training hall of Tactical Response Training Solutions, looking out at an audience of over 300 first responders, military personnel, and medical professionals. The annual Tommy Williams Memorial Conference had grown beyond anything they had imagined when they first conceived it as a small gathering to honor their fallen teammate. The warehouse had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing programs. What had started as a single training facility now encompassed multiple buildings, specialized simulation environments, and partnerships with emergency services agencies across the country. The dream that Sarah had articulated in their early days had become reality. They were the premier emergency response training facility on the East Coast. Ladies and gentlemen, Jake began, his voice carrying easily through the wireless microphone system they had installed for large events. 2 years ago, my business partner Marcus Chun and our patients at Walter Reed Medical Center learning how to walk again, how to live again after losing most of our team in Afghanistan. The audience was silent, respectfully attentive. Jake had learned to be comfortable speaking to large groups, though he still felt a flutter of nerves before major presentations. Today was especially important because it marked a significant milestone for their company and their personal mission. We thought our days of saving lives were over, Jake continued. We thought the best we could hope for was to heal our own wounds and find some quiet way to live with our memories. But we were wrong. The real mission was just beginning. He paused, scanning the audience until his eyes found Sarah in the front row. She wore her wedding ring alongside the engagement ring he had given her in this same building 2 years ago. They had been married 8 months ago in a small ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery, with Marcus as best man and Sarah's parents flying in from Ohio to witness the union of two people who had found healing in each other's love. The man we honor today with this conference communications specialist, Tommy Williams, was 22 years old when he died serving his country. But before that final mission, he made us promise something. He made us promise to take care of each other, to live lives worthy of the sacrifice he and our other teammates were prepared to make. Jake clicked to the next slide in his presentation, which showed a photo of Alpha Team 7 taken just weeks before the explosion. 5 young men in full combat gear, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the confidence of warriors who believed they were invincible. Tommy's sister, Sarah Williams Morrison, is now my wife and the co-founder of this training facility. She has taught me that taking care of each other means more than just watching out for your immediate team. It means sharing what you know with everyone who might need it, passing on skills that could save lives, creating a community of people committed to bringing others home safely. The audience erupted in applause as Sarah stood and waved. She had left nursing 18 months ago to work full-time at the training facility, developing medical emergency curricula that were now being used by first responder agencies across 3 states. Her programs had already been credited with saving dozens of lives. This year's conference theme is expanding the circle of care, Jake continued as the applause died down. Over the next 3 days, you'll participate in training scenarios designed to push your skills to the next level. You'll learn from experts in tactical medicine, emergency response, crisis psychology, and trauma care. Most importantly, you'll connect with other professionals who share your commitment to saving lives. Marcus Chun appeared at Jake's side, moving with the confident stride he had regained through months of physical therapy and sheer determination. His scars had faded to thin, silver lines, and his range of motion had improved dramatically. He now served as the facility's chief tactical instructor and had developed a reputation as one of the most demanding and effective teachers in the field. Before we begin today's sessions, Marcus said, taking the microphone, "Jake, and I want to share some news about the future of tactical response training solutions." Jake felt his heart rate increase slightly. What they were about to announce represented the culmination of everything they had been working toward, but it also meant taking their biggest risk yet. 6 months ago, we were approached by the Department of Defense with a proposal. Marcus continued. They want us to develop a comprehensive training program for military medics and civilian medical personnel who work with combat casualties. Essentially, they want us to create a bridge between battlefield medicine and civilian trauma care. The audience murmured with interest. This was exactly the kind of integration that many in the emergency medical community had been advocating for years. The contract would allow us to establish satellite training facilities at 5 military bases across the country, Jake explained, taking back the microphone. We would train not just military personnel, but also civilian doctors and nurses who work at trauma centers near military installations. The goal is to ensure that wounded warriors receive the same high level of care, whether they're treated on a battlefield or in a civilian hospital. Marcus gestured toward the back of the room, where a group of people in military uniforms were standing. We're honored to have with us today General Patricia Martinez from the Army Medical Research and Development Command, who will be overseeing this program. General Martinez stepped forward, a petite woman with steel gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Thank you, Mr. Chun. I want to tell you all why this partnership is so important to us. Every year, thousands of our service members are injured in training accidents and combat operations. When they're evacuated to civilian medical facilities, there's often a gap between military medical protocols and civilian emergency medicine. This program will close that gap. She paused, looking directly at Jake and Marcus. Mr. Morrison and Mr. Chun have created something unique here. They've taken the lessons learned from their own recovery and transformed them into a systematic approach to emergency care that bridges military and civilian medicine. The Department of Defense is proud to support their expansion. Jake felt a wave of emotion wash over him. 2.5 years ago, he had been a broken man refusing medical treatment and contemplating death. Now he was standing before hundreds of people, announcing a partnership that would allow them to save lives on a scale he had never imagined possible. There's one more thing, Sarah said, approaching the podium. She had asked to speak at this moment, though she hadn't told Jake exactly what she planned to say. When we started this company, our mission was to honor the memory of the teammates we lost by teaching others to save lives. That mission hasn't changed, but it's evolved. She took Jake's hand, and he could feel a slight tremor in her fingers that suggested she was nervous about something. Today, we're announcing the establishment of the Tommy Williams Foundation, Sarah continued. The foundation will provide full scholarships for emergency response training to military spouses, Gold Star families, and first responders from underserved communities. Because everyone deserves to know how to bring their loved ones home safely. The audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Jake stared at his wife in amazement. They had discussed creating a charitable foundation eventually, but she had been working on this in secret for months. The foundation has already received its first major donation, Sarah said, waiting for the applause to subside. An anonymous benefactor has provided funding for 50 full scholarships in the first year alone. Marcus leaned toward the microphone. The anonymous benefactor is my wife, Dr. Lisa Chun. She's a trauma surgeon at Johns Hopkins, and she believes as strongly as we do that this training saves lives. Jake looked out at the audience and saw Lisa Chun in the third row, a brilliant surgeon whom Marcus had met during a medical conference 6 months ago. Their courtship had been a whirlwind romance that culminated in a wedding just 3 weeks ago. Dr. Chun will also be joining our medical advisory board, Sarah added, along with Dr. Patricia Hendricks from Walter Reed, the surgeon who saved Jake's leg and taught us both that healing is possible even when everything seems hopeless. As the presentations concluded and the audience began to disperse toward their breakout sessions, Jake found himself standing with Marcus and Sarah in the same spot where they had first discussed expanding their mission 2 years ago. Can you believe this? Marcus said, looking around at the bustling conference activity. 2 years ago, we were 3 broken people trying to figure out how to put our lives back together. We weren't broken, Sarah corrected gently. We were healing. There's a difference. Jake nodded, understanding the distinction in a way he couldn't have before. Broken implied something that couldn't be fixed, something permanently damaged. But healing was a process, an active choice to become stronger, better, more whole than before. Tommy would be proud, Jake said softly. They all would, Marcus replied. Rodriguez, Thompson, Williams, they all believed in making the world a better place. We're just continuing their work. As the afternoon training sessions began, Jake walked through the facility that had become his life's work. In the trauma simulation bay, a group of paramedics were learning advanced airway management techniques. In the tactical medicine lab, police officers were practicing treating gunshot wounds under stress. In the conference room, military medics were sharing experiences with civilian emergency room nurses. Everywhere he looked, people were learning skills that would save lives. The circle of care that Sarah had spoken about was expanding with every student who walked through their doors, with every technique mastered, with every life that would be saved because someone had received better training. Jake paused at a display case that Marcus had installed near the main entrance. Inside were photos of Alpha Team 7, their service records, and the medals they had earned. At the center was a letter from Tommy Williams to his sister, the one she had shown Jake in the hospital that first day. "Take care of my team," the letter read. "They're good men who give everything for others and never ask for anything in return. They're going to need someone to remind them how to be happy again." Below Tommy's letter was a newer edition, a photo from Jake and Sarah's wedding, showing them surrounded by the extended family they had created at the training facility. Marcus and Lisa, Dr. Hendricks and her husband, Pete Kowalski from physical therapy, and dozens of students who had become friends and colleagues. Happy. Jake considered the word as he studied the photo. He was happy, genuinely and completely happy in a way he hadn't thought possible after the explosion. Not because he had forgotten the pain or the loss, but because he had found a way to transform that pain into something meaningful. Sarah appeared at his side, slipping her arm through his. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about promises kept," Jake replied. "Tommy asked you to take care of his team. You saved my life, helped Marcus heal, and gave us both a purpose bigger than ourselves. I'd say that promise has been more than fulfilled." Sarah smiled and leaned against his shoulder. "The promise isn't finished yet. Every person we train, every life we save, every family that gets to stay whole because someone knew what to do in an emergency. That's all part of taking care of Tommy's team. The team just happens to include everyone who's committed to bringing people home safely." As they stood together watching their students and instructors work, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a hospital bed where he had wanted to die to a training facility where he helped others learn to save lives. From a broken soldier consumed by survivor's guilt to a husband, teacher, and entrepreneur whose every day was devoted to honoring the memory of fallen friends. The mission continued. The circle of care expanded. And somewhere, Jake was certain Tommy Williams was watching with approval as his sister and his teammates built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. In the end, Jake realized that was what healing really meant. Not forgetting the pain, but transforming it into something that made the world better. Every student who walked through their doors, every skill mastered, every life saved was a testament to the truth that even the deepest wounds could become sources of strength. The wounded SEAL had become the healer, and the rookie nurse who had spoken his team's secret code had become his partner in every sense of the word. Together, they had learned that sometimes the most important mission begins not when everything is going right, but when everything seems lost. The mission to bring people home safely would continue for as long as there were people willing to risk their own safety for others. And Jake Morrison intended to make sure they all had the training they needed to succeed.